The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus came to his hometown and began to teach the people in their synagogue, so that they were astounded and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these deeds of power? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? Are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Jude? Are not his sisters here with us? Where then did this man get all this?" And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their own country and in their own house." And Jesus did not do many deeds of power there because of their unbelief. A gospel inspired by God. Do we have problems?
We have problems.
We got problems. The gospel has got problems. Big problems.
What is the problem?
His family has a problem. His neighbors have a problem. Matthew has a problem. Mark has a problem. And the Christian community has a problem. So here's Jesus, nice little quiet boy, lived for the first 30 years, didn't make any kinds of waves. And all of a sudden now he's this extraordinary, eloquent preacher, and he's doing miracles of all kinds. So the first response from his family we find in Mark's Gospel in chapter 3, in verses 21 and again in verse 31, they thought he had flipped his lid. He'd gone mad, so they set out to take him by force because they thought he was mad. Mark 3:21. So the family's response is, the guy has flipped his lid. What happened? Maybe was he doing acid or something? Dropping acid all of a sudden? Nice quiet boy, now he's flipping his lid. And he refuses to talk to them. So they go home and they bring his mother back to try to talk some sense to him. And in Mark chapter 3 verse 31, they come back with his mother. And he's inside in the house preaching to a huge big group, and it's jam-packed, they can't get in. So they send a message in, your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside and they want to talk to you. And the response is, who is my mother? And who are my brothers and sisters? My mother and my brothers and sisters are those who listen to the word of God and keep it. So he refuses to go out to talk to them. So that's the family's problem. He's making a fool of the family. Their good name is being destroyed. The second problem is the neighbors. He's come back to Nazareth. They knew him as the carpenter. Now he's back and he's preaching and he's doing all these wondrous works. And they say, who is this guy? Isn't this the carpenter's son? Don't we know his brothers are James and Joseph and Jude and Simon? Don't we know his sisters are our neighbors here? Isn't Mary his mother? Where the hell did he get all this stuff? And then we were told they took offense at him. Rather than watching what he was doing and listening to what he was saying, they're judging him according to kind of the village's standards. So in another version, they actually take him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, and they try to throw him over. They actually try to assassinate him, and he escapes from them. So they got big problems there. But Matthew has a problem, and he's trying to cover it up. He covers it up in two ways because he's inherited this story from Mark. Mark is the first of the canonical Gospels written. So in this morning's story, this is Matthew's account. Matthew says, he has the crowd saying, "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" In Mark's Gospel is different. Mark says, "Isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary?" Now there's a very important and subtle distinction that's lost on a Western audience 2,000 years after this event. At the time of Jesus, the only time you would ever call somebody the son of a woman was if he was illegitimate. So Jesus should have been known as Ben Yosefu. Jesus, Yehoshua ben Yosefu. He should have been known as Jesus, the son of Joseph. In Mark's Gospel, he's called Yehoshua ben Mariamu. Jesus, the son of Mary. That's a very, very obvious kind of indication to the audience that he's regarded as illegitimate. He doesn't have a father. Because why would he be called after, let me just finish my thesis and then we'll get back to it. Why would he be called after a woman? Now at the time of Jesus, there was this, thought that he was illegitimate because there was no father involved. And so they would create a story in Matthew's Gospel and Luke's Gospel about some kind of a miraculous conception where Jesus is conceived directly by the Holy Spirit, but not with human intercourse. And so in Mark's Gospel, Mark puts it right out there that the crowd said to him, isn't this a bastard? This is a bastard. He's the son of Mary. There's no father involved here. By the time it gets to Matthew's Gospel, 10 years later, Matthew is trying to soft soap it a little bit. So he says, isn't this the carpenter's son? But Mark didn't use that phrase. He said, isn't this the carpenter? Not the carpenter's son, but the carpenter. And so you got this big problem, and Matthew is trying to clear this up, and Luke will try to clear it up by infusing the stories about an angel Gabriel coming and telling Mary that she will conceive directly from the Holy Spirit, that there won't be any human person involved. So that's the problem that the neighbours have with Jesus. Then there's the problem that the Christian community inherits with this issue, because his brothers are named and his sisters are mentioned. Now, according to the Christian church, and particularly Roman Catholicism, Mary was a virgin before, during, and after giving birth to Jesus. And so how do you explain that Matthew and Mark are naming 4 brothers of Jesus? They name Joseph and Jude and Simeon and James as 4 brothers of Jesus. Now, the Christian church then really scrambled to try to undo the damage of this. So the first explanation was, well, in Semitic cultures, the word brother can be used very loosely of not just siblings, but of cousins. You can call your cousins brothers as well. That's great, except that the New Testament was now written in a Semitic language. The New Testament is written in Greek, and the Greek vocabulary can distinguish very easily between siblings and cousins, and it uses a word indicating siblings. So that was the first explanation, and that went down like a lead balloon. So the next one they came up with was that, well, these actually were children of Joseph by a previous marriage. And in that sense, then they can be called brothers or step-brothers of Jesus. So that was the next explanation, that Joseph was married before Mary, before he took Mary, and he had kids by that previous marriage. And you find this in some of the Gnostic scriptures as well, particularly the secret book of James or the infancy gospel of James. You find this story there that Joseph had kids by a previous wedding. And then the third one was the Catholic Church particularly took offense at the notion that Jesus would be raised by anybody who had sex. So that not only would Mary have to be a virginal, Joseph would have to be virginal as well. They couldn't have Jesus been raised in a household where either the father or the mother actually engaged in sexual activity. And so the third story was that Joseph too was a virgin, but he had a brother who had kids, and the brother died, and Joseph took on the kids, and he's raising the kids on behalf of his dead brother. And so there's James and Joseph and Jude and Simeon. They're not even Joseph's kids. They're the kids of his brother. And so now, in some senses, they can use the term that this is the explanation. Jesus is a virgin, Mary is a virgin, and Joseph is a virgin, and we're all happy. Now, the interesting thing is, in the canonical Gospels, there is no evidence that Joseph was an old man. That comes from one of the Gnostic scriptures. If you read any of the 4 Gospels, Joseph is never mentioned as an old man. In fact, you get the opposite impression, because Joseph is betrothed. In Matthew's Gospel, we are told that Mary was betrothed to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be with child. You don't get any indication whatsoever that Joseph was an old man. He was just a man of Mary's own age, maybe 10 years older, which would have been fairly typical. There's no evidence whatsoever in the canonical scriptures that Joseph was an old man. So that's another story that's been borrowed from another source. And we've been kind of indoctrinated in this, and we always have the impression that Joseph was a real old man. There's no evidence for that anywhere in the canonical scriptures. There was a law called the Levirate law, but it's more complicated than this. If a man's brother died childless, then in that instance, the surviving brother had to marry the woman and raise up kids for the dead brother. So he'd have to have intercourse with her. And the children of that, a union would be regarded as legally belong to the dead brother, but there would have to be sex involved in it, and it would have to be a brother who died childless, not a brother who died with children. Am I telling you that? You have to make up your own mind about it. If she had 4 sons and a few daughters, what does that tell you? Because in many of the cultures of the time, there were what called the demigods or the demiurges. In Greek mythology, in Roman mythology, in Sumerian mythology, and in Egyptian mythology, the gods very frequently have intercourse with human women, and they produce a hybrid race, which are sometimes called demigods or demiurges. And so the notion that Jesus didn't have a human father would not have been regarded as unusual at all at the time. many of the great leaders, including Alexander the Great. His father was the god Marduk. And so Philip, who was allegedly the father of Alexander the Great, wanted to divorce his wife, Olympia, who was the mother of Alexander the Great. So it was quite common in the cultures of the time to believe that the great leaders were actually demigods, one of whose parents was divine and the other of whom was human. And typically it was a male, god figure and a human woman. Sometimes it was different. On occasions in the Sumerian legends, you get a goddess having intercourse with a human man and giving birth to a child who was also a demigod. So this would not have been regarded as unusual at all. And so even in the Roman Empire, the emperors were regarded as semi-divine, that in some senses there was a divine intervention in their conception. So this would not have been unusual. There are all versions. There's a great, I think it's the infancy gospel of James, where not only is Jesus conceived without any human involvement, but his mother is conceived by Anna, the grandmother. She's also conceived in an amazing fashion, while her husband Joachim is out of town. And so both the mother and the grandmother of Jesus themselves encounter some kind of a miraculous divine intervention in order to give birth, conceive their kids. Well, I tell my own idea, and this is a way out in left field. I am totally convinced that the human species was genetically modified by a group of extraterrestrials about 445,000 years ago, called by the Sumerians the Anunnaki, that they came down and they intervened just like we are doing right now, genetically manipulating, and they created a worker force. And then at some stage, some of the Anunnaki males found these females very, very attractive, and they had intercourse with them. And this led to a big revolt actually in the Anunnaki community, that they regarded this as bestiality. And so one of the reasons for the flood, according to the Sumerian version, is that the top gods were really, really offended by the intercourse between the Anunnaki males and this hybrid race whom they had created, and they decided to wipe the whole bloody thing out. And they flooded the whole thing in order to kill all these hybrids. And so I think that many of the great leaders like Gilgamesh that you mentioned have some kind of divine blood or Anunnaki involvement. So it's a question of, if you look at a spectrum now genetically, so let's say you have, a hominid, let's call it Neanderthal just for the fun of it, at one end of the scale. And then somehow they're upgraded, and now you have Homo sapiens, who are thinking beings. They do a second upgrade, which is Homo sapiens sapiens, who not only can think, but have language skills. And now some of the Anunnaki males find these women very, very attractive, and they start having intercourse with them. And now you got in another position where they're half Anunnaki and half Homo sapiens. Now if you have one of those mate with an Anunnaki, now you got 3/4 Anunnaki and 1/4 human. Or you go back down this way, if a human half-breed between Anunnaki and Homo sapiens has intercourse just with another human being, then you're just 1/8, divine. So there's all this spectrum of divinity. But leadership is handed down to people who are at the top end of the spectrum. The kings are those who are nearest to the Anunnaki bloodline. And so it will be quite common that if you want to be in a leadership position, or you want to claim a special kind of authority, you're going to have to claim some kind of semi-divine lineage in order to be taken seriously or get a foot up on the opposition. And that's what many of the kings in the Sumerian, the Egyptian, the Greek, that's what they claim they'll make, that they had a divine parent. And that's what conferred special blessings and gifts and skills and the right to rule. And so you get the phrase, even when a king was being consecrated or installed in the Hebrew tradition, it would say, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." That was part of the ordination rite of a king in ancient Israel and other places. "You are my son, today I have begotten you." It's not just I approve that they're making you king, but indicating that somehow there had actually been some kind of a divine intervention in the conception of this person, thus equipping him to be the king. You're absolutely right, and that's exactly Jesus' response today in today's gospel. Why do you have to be born in an extraordinary fashion to be an extraordinary person? It's the quality of the soul that incarnates. Look at what he's doing and look at what he's saying. Judge him by what he has accomplished and what he's saying. Look at the quality of his teaching. Look at the quality of his behavior. This extraordinary, forgiving, healing presence. Why would it matter whether he had 15 siblings? Why would it matter even if he himself was married and had kids of his own? Why would that make a difference? If you look at the kind of the quality of what he's saying and the quality of how he's living his life, that's much more important than any pretended lineage. And that's what he's saying this morning, you know. For which he said, at one stage in John's Gospel, he says, when they were trying to stone him, many good deeds have I done in your midst. For which of these are you stoning me? And he said, no. We're not stoning you because of any good deeds you've done. It's because you, although you're only human, are claiming to be divine. But the claim of Jesus to divinity wasn't the claim that the Anunnaki would be making or anybody else. He was saying, in some senses, I'm a child of God because I realize who I really am. And you are a child of God when you realize who you really are. So Jesus' claim to divinity is not a special category of one, it's a category of all living beings. Everything that exists is an articulation of God. And when you get that, and you align with that, and you behave in that alignment, you're exercising your divinity. And that was his entire message. The same things I do, you will do, and even greater, because I go to the Father and I'll send you the Spirit. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I was saying last week that the people that the authorities fear most is not the lawbreaker, but the person who questions the law. You can break the laws and they'll just throw you in jail and the problem is solved. But you start questioning the law or questioning conventional wisdom, and then you're a big threat, because not only are you liable to kind of go to jail yourself, you're liable to take the whole system down on top of your head. So the dangerous people are always the people not who behave differently, but who think differently. Yeah. The heretics. Yeah. They're the dangerous people. You can become an atheist, keep your mouth shut. You can be an agnostic, keep your mouth shut. You can not practice religion whatsoever, and you're not a threat. As long as you don't start spreading it and questioning and asking everybody else, have you thought about this? Then you're dangerous. Then you need to be taken out of circulation. So the bottom, the kind of take-home message for me is that the greatness of Jesus and the greatness of the Buddha is the realization that every single one of us is divine. That I keep saying this kind of silly statement, everything that exists is simply God in drag. Every kitty cat, every oak tree is just another articulation of the divine. And the entire message of Jesus is, can you realize that? Do you know that you're divine? And if you really know it, you'll recognize it in everybody else. And if you recognize the divinity in yourself and others, you'll behave like a God with love and compassion. That they're the only two characteristics of the divine, love and compassion. And you know who you are, you recognize immediately who everybody else is, and then peace immediately breaks out. That's the take-home message for Jesus. But instead of that, we put him on a pedestal, a one of a kind, to be adored, but couldn't possibly be imitated. And then his whole message is lost.